Alrighty, so the purpose of this little video tutorial is just to go over this double exposure style project and the steps we need to do it, and a little bit more of an in-depth version you guys can view at your desk. So like I said, for this double exposure style photography week, we'll be creating two different images. Like I said, the first image that we'll be creating this week is a practice image in which we utilize photographs that we find on the internet. The second image we'll be doing is a image that we use using photographs that we take ourselves combined with images that we find on the internet. So again, I'm going to go over this left-hand example, not specifically this example, but how I would create it. And then later on this week, like I said, we'll use our own photographs to make an example that uses ourselves. So when you're working on this double exposure style image, the first thing you want to do is navigate to our week 7 module and open the little page I have with links to these high quality image websites. These are websites like Unsplash, Pexels, or Pixabay. You really want to make sure you use these websites and not images you find on Google Images, because the quality of those images tends to be pretty low, whereas these websites will give you really high resolution images. This is important because for this assignment, given that it's a photography-based project, if you're starting off with really low res, really not great quality images, the quality of your project will suffer. So any of these ones are good to use. I really recommend Unsplash or Pexels, but you can use any of the options here as well. I'm just going to go into Pexels for now. Now, once I'm here, I'm going to go through and look for some images. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and look for some images of some people. And this project works best when you can find an image of a person that's like a good portrait of their face. So if these pictures are a little bit too kind of out in the distance, I might go instead look for a portrait image. And again, now we're seeing a lot of good stuff here. So, doesn't really matter which image you use too much. I'm going to go through and use this image of this lady right here. And once I find the image, I'm going to go ahead and click download. And that will download this image right here. And again, if I zoom in, you see it's a really high quality, high resolution image, which is important for this project. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and look for an image that has some texture to it. I really like images of things like flowers, blossoms, images like this where there's a lot of interesting color and things going on. But you can really use whatever image you like. If I go back to my examples on the slideshow, again, examples that have some interesting patterns, colors, texture to them are all fine to use for this. In this case, I'm going to go through and just pick an image that I really like. I think scrolling up, I saw those images of these little rosebuds. So I'm going to click on here and again, click the download button. Now that I have everything all set and downloaded, I can go and hop back into Photoshop. And for this project, I'm going to go through and create a new document. So I'm going to go to New File. I'm going to do our standard letter size document. So 8.5 inches by 11. Sorry, I had a hiccup there. And then I'll leave the resolution at 300 for this project. If you know you don't have that much space on your computer or you're constantly running into storage issues, you can lower the resolution down to about 150. Once that's all set up though, I'll hit create. And then I'll go ahead to File, Place Embedded, and I'll place in the photo of my subject for this. Once I have them placed in, I'm going to go and stretch the image out so it's really covering my background. I'm going to make sure that my subject here is kind of in frame. So I want them to be like right in the middle. Now, once I have my subject in frame, I'm going to go through and use the automatic background removal function to just remove the background from this image right here. So I'll click remove background, and that will go through and cut her out. Now, if the automatic background removal doesn't work, the other option you could do is go to select subject. And once your subject is selected, you can click the little mask button down here, or at the bottom of your layers panel to mask the subject. And this will basically hide all of the parts but the parts we selected. Now, if you do notice there are little parts that it didn't quite select right, I can always go to my lasso tool, turn my lasso tool to the add to selection button, and then use my lasso tool to go through and add more parts to this selection. Or subtract from my selection, in this case, if there are parts that you want to hide or not hide, depending on what the AI kind of selected for you. Whatever the case is, once you have your subject selected, just click the little mask button again, and that will remove the background from that picture. Once I've done this though, I'm going to go back up to File at the top left-hand corner, go back to Place Embedded, and this time I'll place in my second picture of the image that I want to overlap. I'm going to make sure the image is completely covering my subject here. I don't want there to be any overlap. Or I want there to be overlap, I don't want it to be underlapping, I guess. I'll also temporarily lower the opacity of this image, and this will allow me to go through and just make sure, the interesting parts of the second image are overlapping the first part. Once that's all set, I'll raise the opacity back up. And now this is where we're going to do some tricky things that we haven't yet done for in class. So if you look on my layers panel right here, and you look at the layer of the person, you'll see that to the right of them, there's these two little thumbnails. The left thumbnail is the actual image thumbnail. The right thumbnail is the layer mask thumbnail. And basically what a layer mask is, if I hold Alt and click on this thumbnail, you can view it, is in this image, any part of it that is white on this layer mask is not hidden. Any part that is black is hidden. So if you see here, the background is all black. That's why it's hidden from this image. And then the white parts are all not hidden. That's why you can still see the picture of the lady right here. And the way layer masks work is, for example, if I go and grab a black brush and I paint on this layer mask, you'll see that the parts I painted black now get hidden. And vice versa, if I grab a brush, set it to white, and then paint these parts in, you'll see it's now revealing those parts of the background that were once previously hidden. And this is something that we're going to be utilizing on this project. So what I need to do now is I need to take this layer mask of the lady right here and bring it on to this picture of the flowers. So to do that, I'm going to hold Alt on my keyboard. You can find it at the bottom left-hand corner. I'm going to click on this little layer mask, so the black and white thumbnail image here. I'm going to drag it up to my second layer, so it's highlighted in blue. And when I let go, what you'll see now is that this second image has been cut out in a very similar way to my first one. And really, we've done almost all the steps. From now on, it's just kind of going through and choosing how we want these images to interact. So the first thing I want to do is on this top picture of the flowers where it says normal, I'm going to click that. And I'm going to go through the options between light in here and then these linear lights. And what you'll see is when I select an option, it's going to go through and change the way that those images interact with each other. So the ones I recommend the most are either the screen or the low overlay options, but you can really choose whichever one that you feel like fits the subject the most. In this case, I'm just going to go back to that screen option. Once I have that selected, I'm then going to click on that thumbnail image again. More specifically, the layer mask on this second photo. I'm going to grab my brush tool. On my color picker here, I'm going to make sure it's set to black. So if you want, you see it's currently set to white with black underneath. I can hit this little arrow button to flip that. I'm going to change my brush to a soft round brush. And I'm going to set the opacity of my brush tool to around 20%. And now using my brush, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to go over and paint kind of above the person's face. More specifically, their eyes, their mouth, their nose. And what you'll see is happening is as I go through and kind of paint over these details with this black brush, with this little layer mask selected, I'm kind of revealing parts of the subject's face back in. And this is what's going to create this double exposure style photograph, is that I'm going through and selectively revealing the parts of the image that I want to be featured on the final, and leaving the parts that aren't as prominent to kind of still be blended in with the rest of the image there. So again, I'll go over her hands a little bit, maybe a little bit of her arms, so you can see some of that detail. You want to be, slow and careful with this, so we're not just going through and, making it too streaky. This is the reason I say to use a soft brush with a low opacity, because if I choose a hard brush with a high opacity and click and drag, you see it's not really blending into one another. So by using a soft brush and lowering the opacity back down, I can really subtly kind of bring out these parts. And again, if I hold Alt and click on this thumbnail image, you can see here that the parts that are darker, gray, or black are the parts that are being revealed in this image below. And for here, it's really just kind of based on feel itself. There's no real specific way about what you need to reveal and what you don't need to reveal. I like to focus a little bit on the person's face. Maybe bring in some texture from their hair. But you don't want to go too crazy with it. And if you do feel like you've revealed too much of the image, what you can do is you can swap the color of your brush back to white. And now I can paint those parts back in. So if I want to make those roses stand out a little bit more, I can paint those back into the image. And again, I can swap back to that black brush and then just go wild. So I'm gonna paint in her cheek right here a little bit more. Now if I compare it without the original photo with the other one over top, you can see now we're starting to blend those together in a really nice and pleasant way. If you want to take the next extra steps, you can actually swap your brush back to white, select that top thumbnail image, and even reveal some of the background too. So if I want to reveal, say, some more of the kind of outside image, I can go on actually between these two thumbnails and start to paint it back in. So I can reveal some of that photograph of what's going on underneath. And again, I'm just painting on both now the little thumbnail images and their backgrounds. Now, once we've done all of that, the final step really too is to make sure our background layer kind of blends in with everything. So I'm gonna click my background layer. I'm gonna click the little half circle right here. I'll set it to a solid color fill. And I'm just going to kind of start clicking around the image to sample some of the different colors I have. So this way I have a unified color scheme between my top image, my bottom image, and now the kind of background surrounding it. So I really like the way that this kind of light, subtle, like yellowy color kind of looks. I'm grabbing from some of these plants right here. And I'm thinking that looks pretty slick right there. And once I'm done with all of this, then from here, I just need to go ahead and save and export my document. So I'm going to make sure to go ahead and save it as a Photoshop file. I'll just name it Double Exposure Practice. And again, I will export it also as a JPEG/PNG file. So I prefer PNG, so I'm going to do that. I'll hit export. And now if I go and view that final image, you can see here I have this really nice combination of those two photos. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Like I said, this is a process that once you get used to it can go really quickly. If I want to speed run an example, I can do that real quick. I can create a new document. I can place in a photo. This time I'll use an example from my other class that I did with them. I'll resize it so it kind of fills up my image. I will remove the background, place in my second photo, scale it up so it fits over everything. And again, while holding Alt, I'll click and drag that layer mask onto the top photo, set the blending mode to an option that I feel like just looks the best. This one is totally personal preference. So in this case, I think I'm going to do a screen. Yeah, I'll do a hard light. Again, once I have that blending mode selected, I'll click on the layer mask for the top image, grab my brush, make sure it's black, make sure the opacity is anywhere between 20 and 40%. And it's a soft brush. And again, I'll start to paint back in some of those details, more specifically of the person's face. And I kind of like to just paint one side of the person's face. So in this case, it's kind of part of their face that has, their lips, their nose, all that kind of detail that makes us human. And I'll leave the other face, or rather side of the face, still blended in. Maybe I'll go over a bit on their clothes a little bit so you can see a little bit of that detail. And once I have that all set, I'll set my background layer. I'll do a solid color fill. I'll select a photo from the image so I have that, again, kind of unified color scheme. And obviously there's things I could have done better on here. I could have gone through and made sure I cut out the photo a little bit better. It looks like some of it got a little lost in translation there. That's okay. All I'm doing now is I'm going and revealing again some of that background layer. I might hide some of it as well too. And you can see here how, 5-10 minutes you can really go through and create a really cool example of one of these style of images. So that's where I'm going to end recording. Again, if you have questions, just let me know. But this is what we're doing. Monday and Tuesday of this week, we're just trying to make one of these practice style images. And like I said, later on this week, we'll go through and start to bring in our own photos, more specifically a photo of ourselves and an image that we can find to overlap on top of it.